Today we're going to explore a subject that we rarely get the chance to cover on Simply Science, watersheds. A watershed is an area of land where all the streams, rainfall, and snowmelt drain to a common point on a river network. Studying a watershed helps us better understand how water moves through an environment and how changes to an environment like forest disturbances or climate variability can affect the water cycle. About 50 kilometers north of Sault Ste. Marie in northern Ontario, you'll find the Turkey Lakes Watershed, a key long-term research site where scientists are uncovering the secrets of water, tree health, and climate change. Our team is leading innovative research to see how climate and forest changes can affect water cycles, tree health, and entire ecosystems. So let's head to the research site and join Jason, Matthew, and Danielle as they study the watershed in action.
We're standing here in the Turkey Lakes Watershed, a long-term research site operated by the Canadian Forest Service. You're probably wondering, what is a watershed? Well, a watershed is a landscape where water drains to a common outlet. So you can have small little streams that you might stumble upon when you go hiking, but then you can have huge watersheds as well. So things like the Ottawa River, the St. Lawrence River, the Fraser River if you're out west. And you can have watersheds of all shapes and sizes between these two extremes. We're standing here at what we call a hydrometric weir. This is an outlet to the watershed that we're looking at. A watershed is a really useful way to think about the landscape and forest ecosystems and forest management, because we can essentially treat it as a water balance. And so we have rainfall coming into the watershed. It drains downslope along the hill slopes into the stream and then out of the watershed at the main outlet here. During that time that water goes from rainfall down into our stream flow, it can do a lot of different things. It spends a lot of time in the soil, and that's where it can be a major source of water for the health of our forests. A watershed or a stream that drains a watershed integrates all the processes occurring up in that watershed and up in those hill slopes. So the way you can think about it is, if we take a measurement here at the outlet of the watershed, it is an integrated signal of all these various forest ecosystem processes occurring upslope and upstream. We can take a water sample, or we can measure the amount of water leaving the watershed, and it gives us an idea of what's happening and the health of that ecosystem upstream. Some questions that we're trying to ask at the Turkey Lakes Watershed is, how are climate change, so increasing air temperatures, changes in the timing and amount of precipitation, the changes in our snow cover, our snowpacks are getting much smaller with the warming climate. How do all those sorts of environmental changes alter both the cycling of water in these systems, but also the trees that depend on that water? Now, historically, at Turkey Lakes, we've really focused on the outlet of these watersheds, because they provide a really valuable integrated signal of what's happening within the watershed. And so for 45 years, we've been visiting these outlet sites, these hydrometric weirs, taking water chemistry samples, monitoring stream flow, and this gives us a really good idea of what's happening in terms of the forest ecosystem health upstream. But in the last couple years, with a lot of our collaborators, such as Magdalena Hemi at Trent University, we've moved from the outlets and actually have started taking measurements and doing work in the watershed itself. And this provides some really important insights on the internal functioning of these watersheds and how they control where and when water is delivered to either the atmosphere, to our streams, or into deeper groundwater systems. And this, of course, has really important implications, not only for growing healthy forests, but for water supply and healthy aquatic ecosystems that we as humans love and cherish. Let's go now into the hill slope and see all the different forms of measurements that we're making to understand and reveal the secrets these watersheds have in terms of how they work and how they deliver water.
I'm Matthew. I'm a forest ecohydrology analyst, and I've been focused on studying the stable water isotopes of our watershed here, because they form naturally. They're really convenient for us to sample and monitor in ecosystems. The way we study them, you can think of it like different sources of water are dyed a different color. That's their isotope signature. So for instance, say the rain that falls on our site is dyed blue, and then the water that's stored in the ground and kind of seeps out, we call that groundwater, if it's dyed red, as the two mix, as they enter the stream, for instance, they form a purple color. Looking at what different shades of purple are coming out of the stream, we can figure out how much of each source is forming that stream water. And this can tell us a lot about the processes that are going on in the ecosystem. We can also sample the water in the trees and see what isotope signature, or shade of purple, if you will, is in the tree water. And that can also tell us what sources of water the trees are mainly using for their growth. So one thing that makes this analysis more complex, but is actually a feature, is that the rain doesn't just come down as one with one isotopic signature or one color in our analogy, but it's actually each rainfall event has a different color or signature to it. And then we can trace those colors as they mix in the ecosystem by sampling the stream, the tree water, the soil water, and the incoming rain. And we can use that to figure out how the water is moving through the site. So studying this is important because it allows us to find the water balance of the ecosystem, but to also be able to predict, if that water balance changes, how it might affect the forest health and the stream flow, which is important to understand under a changing climate. So this is one of our precipitation collectors, and they collect the rainwater, which we use for sampling, but they also allow us to measure how much rain has fallen between when we take a sample. It funnels it in the water and then into this container here. So this is a soil auger, and we use that to sample the soil at different depths below the surface. And then from the soil, we can measure the soil moisture content and analyze it for their isotope signatures. So now I'm just going to use a spatula and take some from the bottom of the sample I took and then just put it in this vial for analysis.
We need to sample the trees themselves in order to look at the isotopic signature of the water within them. And we do that in two ways. So we're going to take a sample from the phloem and the xylem using a branch sample. And we're also going to get a core sample from inside the tree trunk. So in order to do that, we're using this long saw. We've picked out our branch and we're going to see if we can cut it down. So we've cut down this branch, and I will note that normally we do the sampling when there's leaves on the trees, but we like to get one round of sampling after the leaves have dropped so we can compare. So that's what this is. And we're just gonna prepare our branch here. Okay. So earlier I mentioned the phloem, and so to get at that, we just take the bark off the tree, and then the phloem's the green part that's under the bark. By extracting the phloem and the xylem from these branches, we then send these into the lab and we extract the water from those tree parts. So basically we're going to conduct our isotopic analysis on this and see exactly what water this tree specifically is using while it grows. And one important note is this sort of work, we're trying to work against the clock a little bit, because as we cut into the branch, water starts evaporating immediately, and we don't want that to happen. So Matthew's gonna start vialing these little tiny bits, and we cut them into small pieces so that we have a larger surface area for the water to be pulled from in the lab. So Matthew's getting a core from the trunk of the tree so that we can get our xylem sample from this location, and that will go along with our samples from the branch that we took. And using this increment bore, we can get a sample from the tree trunk without killing the tree. it's important that we get these samples from the same tree so that we can see the different isotopic signatures that are at this location in the tree and also in the branch. How are things changing from the lower trunk part to the branch and so on. So now we're going to sample this core here. So we're going to make sure we don't get any of the bark bits, and we're also going to remove the heartwood from the very core of the tree. We don't want that for this sample. So this here is one of our subsurface wells that we have a sensor in that's measuring the height of the water level essentially in the well itself. Right now we're going to get a manual reading of the water depth below the surface, and then we're going to download the sensor that's in here. Matthew is going to use this, so it's a long tube that has a ruler on it essentially, and he's going to blow air into the tube and it will start bubbling when it hits the water surface. So this is our very high-tech method. Despite actually being very low-tech, it's pretty accurate, right? So he sees, or he can hear when the bubbling starts, and he's going to note on the ruler
106.6.
Okay, so we're going to write that down. And then we're going to do a reading from the soil surface itself to the top of the well so that we can do a bit of math there and figure out the actual depth.
82 centimeters.
So now we're going to be removing the water level sensor, and it's actually measuring pressure. So we know what atmospheric pressure is, and then we subtract atmospheric pressure from the pressure this is reading, and that's going to give us the sort of water level, water pressure, and we convert that to water level with our manual readings here. All right, so now that we have our sensor plugged in, we can extract the data from it, and this is just an example of what the data is going to look like. So the black line here is that pressure reading, and we will eventually convert that to water level or water table depth. We're trying to get an idea of where water is moving under the surface and where it's reaching the stream. And we are in sort of a channel seep right here, so we know that water's coming in. And then we can also get an idea of how deep the water is that the trees might be accessing. And through time, like for example, in a drought period, we might look at our sap flow sensors and see that the trees aren't really transpiring that much. And we can also look at these water level sensors and say, oh, well, the water table is really deep and they don't actually have access to that much water, and it also hasn't rained. So that might be why they're a bit water stressed. Here we are at the main Turkey Lakes Meteorological Station, and this is where we measure continuously air temperature, precipitation, wind speed, and incoming solar radiation, as well as long wave radiation. And these variables are useful for many different studies that are going on here, and they're also long-term. We've been collecting these measurements for almost 45 years here, and so that gives us a really nice picture of our changing climate. So this right here is a precipitation gauge, and we can measure snow and rainfall with it, which is great. And then up there on the scaffolding is where we have the rest of our instruments. So we have our air temperature, wind speed, and radiation coming in.
So a big question is, why do we care about making a whole bunch of little measurements in this little watershed in the middle of Northern Ontario? We are trying to understand at a national scale how forests change and watersheds are changing with environmental change. And the most effective way to do that at a national scale is to use models. But we need to be able to trust those models. And these measurements that we're making at these sorts of long-term intensively researched sites are really critical for testing and evaluating those models and making sure that those models are giving us the right answers for the right reasons. Because at the end of the day, every one of us is sitting in a watershed or standing in a watershed. And so we really have at a national level, all Canadians need to really care or should care about how we manage and protect our forested watersheds, because they are critical to all the things that we value about this beautiful landscape.
While some of our experts are fascinated by the way water moves and flows, others are more interested in how fire behaves. Click on this video to see how a mass timber building performs in an actual fire test. Make sure to do all the YouTube things, like and subscribe, and keep an eye out for our next video.